Increasing your understanding of yourself and other people, especially in times of social media and overabundance, requires an in-depth knowledge about dopamine and its opposite, the here and now system. The here and now system, mainly represented through neurotransmitters like serotonin or oxytocin, moderates all things in your immediate reach, your so-called peripersonal space. Dopamine, on the other hand, moderates all things outside of your reach, your extrapersonal space. That might mean getting material things like a new phone or a new car, or abstract things like knowledge, power, or even love. Simply spoken, dopamine is what drives entrepreneurs to build a company, scientists to find explanations, and philosophers to find meaning. It is also the reason why husbands and wives cheat on their significant others and why people get addicted to drugs. So, in short, why we are never really happy for a long time. So that's why today we're taking a look at the book The Molecule of More from Lieberman and Long to learn more about dopamine and how it influences us and our surroundings in our everyday life. Alright, so the first thing we need to understand when we talk about dopamine is of course the primary way in which it is produced. And that would be the reward prediction error, which is basically the difference between an expected reward and the actual reward we received. Let's look at a little bit of an example for that. If you go on a date without really expecting all that much and you really click with the other person, the difference between what you expected and what actually happened is the reward prediction error, which floods the brain with dopamine. Then you presumably actually get together with the other person, which is obviously a highly dopaminergic state because it just feels great. After a while, however, your expectations catch up with reality and your dopamine level normalizes, which is when you feel like your relationship lost the spark or the edge a little bit. And I think the trick in that situation is to switch from a more future-oriented dopaminergic approach to a present-oriented here and now approach and allow the neurotransmitters like serotonin or oxytocin to fill the gap that dopamine left. This is oftentimes more difficult for people who are generally more driven and ambitious because they attach a lot of dopamine to another pursuit right away, which blocks out the H&N system and lets the relationship slip a little bit into the background. Okay, so now that we found out how dopamine is created, let's take a look at why it is created. Because dopamine's primary purpose is not really pleasure, but to keep us alive. That means dopamine doesn't really care if you will enjoy a particular activity, it will just assess how relevant it could be to your survival and make you crave for it depending on the answer. So how do drugs enter this equation, as they are not actually relevant for our survival? Well, they don't actually enter the equation but circumvent it entirely by artificially triggering the dopamine system more powerfully than any natural desire ever could. As far as dopamine is concerned, drugs are the most relevant thing for your survival, which is why you crave them stronger than almost anything else. Additionally, drugs stimulate the brain regardless of the situation you are in, which means they are also connected to any situation you are in within your brain. And since dopamine is the molecule of more and not the molecule of pleasure, you will still crave the drug even though you don't enjoy it anymore. Withdrawal from the drug then creates a negative reward prediction error, pushing your dopamine way under the baseline, which just feels terrible. But what may be the worst thing is that addiction is of course not limited to drugs per se, but also evident in other of society's over-engineered easy access version of basic primal needs. An easy example for that would be porn, because it offers a large release of dopamine without any effort whatsoever to get it, which undermines the desire to actually work in order to get the same kind of gratification. Therefore, the easy takeaway for this part of the video might be to limit your access to easy dopamine releases, which do not require any previous work, be it like drugs, pornography, or social media. And while this might sound hard at first, there's a complementary dopamine circuit next to the pleasure dopamine circuit that calculates what sort of more is worth having, which is called the dopamine control circuit. The dopamine control circuit provides our ability to construct plans, strategize, and dominate the world around us. Thereby, it's also the tool which fuels our imagination by letting us peer into the future and assess the consequences of our actions. Lieberman and Long describe it like that. Control dopamine carries us beyond the primitive I want of desire dopamine. It gives us tools to comprehend, analyze, and model the world around us so we can extrapolate possibilities, compare and contrast them, then craft ways to achieve our goals. So you might ask yourself, understandably so, how can dopamine provide craving and control at the same time? You can think about dopamine as the fuel within a rocket ship. The same fuel that provides the boost for the rocket can also be used to steer the rocket in other direction. Regardless of the engine that dopamine is actually in, it feels great. This is evident in every part of your everyday life. But if you want a proof for control dopamine specifically, try to learn how to play chess and see how you feel in the process, and especially after you win. I can guarantee you it's amazing. And the great thing about control dopamine specifically is that it also provides the tendency to fulfill plans and goals once we craft them. And while this has been demonstrated in many different animal experiments, the most important things for us humans to take note if we want to leverage control dopamine is that it requires a sense of self-efficacy. Without much complicated explanation, self-efficacy basically means that we need to have the belief that we can do something before we actually can do something. So until now, control dopamine sounds awesome, but we should take a look at what happens when control dopamine runs out of control. Because in the same way that people become addicted to drugs, they can also become addicted to achievement via this dopamine control circuit, which makes them unable to experience any fulfillment in the here and now. That results from a chemical imbalance between future-oriented dopamine and here and now chemicals like serotonin and oxytocin. And since emotions are basically here and now phenomena as well, people who become addicted to achievement also lose their touch with emotions in general. That is not only true for emotions like joy, but also emotions like guilt, and it's really well explained by Lieberman and Long in the following citation. When more trumps morality, all doorways for fraudulent and unethical behaviors are opened, as such behaviors are nothing more but a tool for the control dopamine-led person. As a full-time consultant who started a YouTube channel while trying to keep up on reading and sports, and who usually relaxes by watching Netflix or YouTube, I think I can speak towards the problem of too much dopamine. And while working and watching Netflix or YouTube, so control dopamine and pleasure dopamine basically cancelled each other out quite well, I feel like. The most powerful tool in creating harmony for me was a practice of mindfulness and meditation. While mindfulness basically boiled down towards being in the moment, so to actually cook when I'm cooking and not watching a video simultaneously, creating a habit out of meditation was even more helpful. That's because meditation really helped to anchor myself more in the here and now by reducing distractions and therefore increasing focus and productivity, which both were very necessary, at least for me personally. So if you're interested in finding out how to build a habit out of meditation most efficiently, I would really recommend my video about atomic habits, and if you're not, then please leave a like and subscribe. It would really help a lot.